In this video, sorry for jumping around here. In this video, I'm going to explain the decision making in the judicial branch, how courts go about making decisions. And the way it's supposed to work is that judges, in theory at least, are not supposed to decide on cases based on their own personal feelings. The reason being that in order for a country to function, there needs to be some stability in the legal system. If the outcome of a trial is based solely on the judge who happens to be heading your case, then there's no consistency across the country. Ideally, justice should be the same whether you're in a court in California, Texas, New York, or Florida. And so in order to make that happen, or to get as close as possible to that, there's a process that judges use in order to make decisions, a two-step process. And so I want to talk about each of the steps. Let's imagine, for the sake of this discussion, and you can use this example on your on the essay if you get this question, that a judge is dealing with a case that has to do with freedom of speech. Doesn't matter what the details of the case are, but it's a case about freedom of the speech. And it might be about symbolic freedom of speech, like in Texas versus Johnson. It might be actual freedom of speech, but just something having to do with freedom of speech. Well, again, I'll fill in some details. Somebody did something, they were arrested, and they challenged the law that they were arrested by. They said this law, whatever the law was, violated my First Amendment right to freedom of speech. So the question is, how would judges go about making a decision in a case like that? Well, the first thing they would do is they would begin by locating the precedent. Now, I know it may sound like I'm saying the word president, as in President of the United States, but that's not what I'm saying. The word I'm saying is precedent. It comes from the word precede, or something that came previously. What I mean by that, when I say that they're going to be locating the precedent, is the first thing the judge is going to do is they're going to look for previous rulings that other judges have made in similar cases. So in our example, the court case has to do with freedom of speech. What the judge is going to do is look up past cases that have to do with freedom of speech that are similar to the one that the judge is having to deal with. Now, it doesn't have to be exact because oftentimes individual cases are different, but the idea is to look for many rulings on freedom of speech and then to see what previous judges have decided. How did they conclude their case? What ruling did they make? What was their approach to deciding a question of whether or not a law violates the First Amendment, right? So they would look up as many cases as they can, and especially ones that were hugely significant that have to do with freedom of speech. So that's the first thing. So they're not just going to look at the facts of the case and just figure out what they think is right or wrong. They're going to look and see what other judges have done in previous cases that are similar, not in. There's something called the doctrine of stare decisis. Stare decisis is a Latin phrase that, from what I'm told, means let the decision stand, right? I don't know Latin, so I'm going to just assume that that's correct. What the doctrine of stare decisis says is that if a judge locates the precedents, like the previous cases that were similar. And if the judge sees a pattern of decision making that's pretty consistent, that the judge should let that decision stand. In other words, the judge should apply the same rulings, the same logic to make a decision in their case. Sort of keep the same rulings, keep the same logic, use the same reasoning to decide their case that the previous judges have, especially if they see a pattern. So for example, if they look through the precedents and they notice that in most cases, judges are tending to make it harder for the government to limit freedom of speech. Any law that limits freedom of speech, they tend to rule those laws unconstitutional because they want to protect freedom of speech. Then they should do the same thing in their case. That's the doctrine of stare decisis. Let the decision stand. What this does is it provides stability in court decision making, so that it's not just a judge who has a particular worldview looking at a particular set of facts and making a decision based on what she thinks is right or wrong, that they're going to look at what past judges have done, understand the past reasoning that judges have used, and that if that reasoning still applies, they're going to use it in their case. This is going to provide stability, so it doesn't matter whether you wind up in a court in California, Texas, New York, or Florida, or in the middle of the country in Kansas, right? You're going to get a similar ruling. That's the idea behind the doctrine of stare decisis. But now, this is a really important point. While the doctrine of stare decisis is the general principle that judges can follow or are supposed to follow, they can overturn or reverse previous decisions. They have it within their authority to look back at previous cases, see a pattern, but say, you know what? I think the previous decisions were wrong. Now, you don't do that just willy-nilly. You don't do that just because you have a different point of view, or at least you're not supposed to. If things have changed substantially, if society has changed, if standards are changed, it may be that society has come to a new conclusion about an old topic, right? Or maybe new circumstances have presented themselves, the courts can reverse previous decisions. It's a huge thing to do. It's significant, but it does lay within their power. And it's another reason that the courts are so powerful, because, like I say, the doctrine of stare decisis provides stability, but there's always that ability of the courts to overturn a previous decision and make a new one, to reject the reasoning of the past and sort of begin a new way of thinking about things. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next video.